Imagine the richest family in America barricading their mansion at the front steps while a crowd pounds the iron gate, chanting "Murderer" and "Ludlow," holding a rope and a can of kerosene. Inside, the lights go out room by room, rifles slide into window slots, and a servant is ordered to burn every telegram before sunrise. Because tonight, the Rockefellers aren't hosting guests, they're waiting for an attack. I'm John. Drop a like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. This channel has people tuning in from everywhere, and I love seeing how far our history-obsessed corner of the internet reaches. Now let's begin with the truth that made the Rockefeller Mansion feel like a fortress. In 1914, the name Rockefeller wasn't just wealth, it was anger with a target. The place was the Rockefeller Estate at Pocantico Hills, north of New York City. High ground, long drive, iron gates, and enough staff to run it like a small town. The newspapers didn't describe it like a home. They described it like a symbol. And after Ludlow, symbols don't get left alone. That week, the estate manager kept a folder on his desk that never closed. Not invitations, not menus. A threat file, notes from the city, mentions in the press. Warnings passed quietly from people who wanted favors later. Names underlined, locations circled, times, routes. And the strangest part was how normal the mansion tried to look while it prepared. Downstairs, fresh flowers, polished wood, dinner as scheduled. Upstairs, curtains pinned just right so you could see out without being seen. Extra lanterns staged in halls where they shouldn't have been needed. A locked cabinet in the study that held nothing valuable, just copies of telegrams. Because telegrams were the bloodstream of this crisis. They carried two kinds of messages. The public ones, clean words for the papers. The private ones, the kind that start with "Do not leave the house" and end with "Burn after reading." On the afternoon the first crowd showed up, the warning didn't come from a screaming messenger. It came as a small change in how the gatekeepers moved. A patrolman from the nearby road walked up to the estate's outer gate, spoke to the guard in a low voice, and handed over a note. The guard read it, didn't react, then turned and jogged toward the house. Jogged, in a place where staff were trained to never hurry. That's when the estate shifted into no accidents mode. The main gate stayed shut, but the side entrance, the one used for deliveries, was sealed with a second lock. The stable yard was cleared. Two men were placed in the tree line with binoculars. And inside the house, the manager gave the order nobody wanted to hear spoken out loud. No one goes outside alone. By dusk, you could hear the crowd before you could see it. Not thousands, doesn't need to be. A few dozen angry people at the right gate, with the right chance, can sound like a mob. They stood at the iron bars and yelled the same two words again and again, Rockefeller and Ludlow, like they were trying to weld the names together permanently. Some carried signs. Some carried nothing but their hands and their voice. And one man near the front had a coil of rope slung over his shoulder in a way that wasn't subtle. Whether it was theater or intent didn't matter. The message landed either way. The guard captain, an ex-military type the family kept for exactly this reason, didn't give a speech. He gave instructions like this was a drill. Nobody fires unless the gate is breached. Nobody opens the gate for any reason. If anyone tries to climb, you take them down with force, not bullets. Then the first real escalation happened, and it didn't come from the crowd. It came from inside the house. A maid ran from the study to the kitchen with her face drained white. She whispered to the cook, and the cook stopped mid-motion like she'd been struck. "Someone called," the cook said to the butler. "From the city. They said there's a package on its way." A package was a polite word for what everyone was thinking. The butler didn't ask what kind. He went straight to the manager. 5 minutes later, the manager did something that tells you how serious it was. He ordered every delivery refused. Food, coal, anything. Nobody drives onto the grounds. Nobody brings anything through the gate. That sounds like paranoia until you realize what's happening. A mansion is a machine with openings, deliveries, laundry, staff entrances. If someone wants to hurt you, they don't come through the front door. They come through routine. So they shut routine down. Then, close to midnight, the crowd finally surged. Not enough to break the gate, but enough to test it. The iron bars rattled. A stone flew and cracked against the outer wall. Another followed. You can't do much damage with stones against a place built to last. But that isn't the point. The point is to make the people inside feel hunted. Upstairs, a young Rockefeller aide stood at a window, slit behind a curtain, watching the gate line like he was counting faces. In the study below him, the manager opened the telegram cabinet and pulled out a stack of messages already copied. And here's the detail that made this feel like a real case, not a rumor. He didn't lock the originals away. He fed them into the fireplace, one by one. Not because he wanted warmth, because he wanted no paper trail if something went wrong tonight. As the crowd noise rose, a new telegram arrived, hand-delivered by a writer who came through a back road the family controlled. The manager read it alone, then folded it into his pocket like it was poison. The guard captain asked, "What does it say?" The manager answered, "It says they're not done with us in the city." Outside, the chanting didn't stop. Inside, nobody sat down to dinner. And in that silence between a mansion holding its breath and a crowd refusing to leave, you can feel the true darkness of this story taking shape. This wasn't about a haunting or a hidden room or a local legend. This was about a family so powerful that when the country turned on them, the fight didn't stay in newspapers. It followed them home. By the second night, the crowd at the gate wasn't the scary part anymore. The scary part was that the mansion started getting tested like a target. Small probes, quiet tricks, the kind you use to find a weak door before you try something bigger. The estate's guard captain kept repeating one rule: don't react to noise, react to movement. Chanting is noise. A man slipping along the tree line with a bundle under his coat is movement. And that's exactly what happened just after dark. A delivery wagon rolled up to the outer gate with a crate and a handwritten note that said it was medical supplies. The driver was calm, too calm, insisting the package had been ordered earlier. The guard didn't argue. He asked one question: who signed? The driver didn't have a name, just a scribble. The guard captain didn't open the crate. He made the driver step back, then had two men drag it to a clear patch of gravel away from the gate, away from the stable, away from the house. They cracked it open with a tool from a distance. Inside wasn't medicine. It was heavy metal wrapped in cloth, pipe sections packed tight, the kind of thing you could turn into a device if you knew what you were doing. No label, no invoice, no sender. The driver went pale and tried to claim he didn't know. The guard captain didn't hit him. He didn't need to. He simply said, "You're staying right here until the county man arrives," and the driver's knees almost gave out, because that's what this was now. Not protests, not gossip. A threat serious enough to bring law to the gate. This is where the Rockefeller name matters. After the Ludlow Massacre, the Rockefeller family, especially John D. Rockefeller Jr., became a national symbol of corporate power and corporate violence in the public mind. People protested them directly, and the story followed them home. Inside the mansion, the estate manager did something that tells you how terrified rich people are of paper. He started a burn pile in the study fireplace again, but this time it wasn't telegrams about schedules. It was telegrams about routes, names, warnings, anything that could later be read as they knew an attack was coming. He was trying to make the future defense simple. We had no idea. At the same time, a different kind of machine switched on upstairs. A man arrived at the estate who didn't carry a weapon. He carried language. Ivy Lee, one of the earliest crisis publicists, was retained by Rockefeller Jr. in 1914 to help repair the family's image after Ludlow. In these stories, people imagine a shadowy fixer whispering in a corner. The reality is uglier. A calm professional walks into the house and starts turning chaos into a plan. Lee didn't ask, "Are you safe?" He asked, "What's the story tomorrow morning?" He sat with the manager and the lawyer and mapped out two battles at once, the physical one at the gate and the public one in the newspapers. He didn't deny the anger outside. He treated it like weather. The question was how the Rockefellers would look when the storm passed. That's when the mansion became more than a home. It became a command room. They began drafting statements that didn't sound like fear. They sounded like responsibility. They talked about regret, concern, order, and investigation. Clean words, carefully chosen, because the wrong sentence could make a mob feel justified. But while the public language got smoother, the private precautions got harsher. The guard captain ordered the staff searched, not like criminals, but like risks. Every apron pocket, every satchel, every lunch tin. That kind of search humiliates people, and the Rockefellers knew it. But fear always does the same thing. It makes powerful families treat everyone near them as a possible doorway. And then came the moment that made the whole estate go silent. A young stable hand, adult, nervous, sweating, was caught trying to slip out the back fence line with a folded paper in his boot. When they pulled it free, it wasn't a love letter. It was a rough map of the service road and the delivery entrance, with two notes in the margin. Side lock changed. Watch at midnight. That wasn't the language of a random protester at the gate. That was inside information. The manager wanted to call police immediately. Ivy Lee stopped him. "Not yet," Lee said, according to one later account. "If we drag this into a headline tonight, we hand them the spectacle." So they did what wealthy houses do best. They kept it private and tightened control. The stable hand didn't get beaten. He got boxed in. Sent to a room with a guard outside and a quiet question asked over and over. "Who paid you? Who met you? Where did you leave messages?" He kept saying, "I didn't know." Then he said one sentence that made the guard captain's face go hard. "They told me it wasn't about the gate. They told me it was about the road. Not the front entrance. The route. The moment the family moved. That changed everything, because a gate is easy to defend. A carriage on a road is not." Close to midnight, the crowd returned louder than before, but now the guards weren't watching faces. They were watching hands. They were watching the tree line. They were watching the spot where the road dipped, and a rider could wait unseen. A bottle flew over the gate and smashed on stone. It wasn't fire. It was a message. We can reach inside. Then the mansion got the telegram the manager had mentioned the night before, the one he called poison. It didn't say, "They're coming." It said something colder. Noise in Manhattan. Something being built. No details. No signatures. Just a warning that the threat wasn't only at the gate. And the Rockefellers' response wasn't to scream. It was to pivot. Ivy Lee pushed a strategy that sounds unbelievable until you understand how power works. Instead of hiding forever, Rockefeller Jr. would go into the open, meet miners, take photographs, and try to rebuild trust. That's documented in accounts of Lee's work with him after Ludlow. In other words, the mansion could be a fortress for a night, but it couldn't be a cage forever. If the public believed the family was hiding behind gates, the anger would only grow. So by dawn, the estate was doing two things at once: locking down the property and planning how to walk back into the world without getting torn apart. And Elias, the clerk I'm following as our eyes inside this story, realized the simplest truth. The mansion wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the middle, because whatever was being built in Manhattan was still out there. And it wasn't chanting, it was machinery. By morning, the crowd at Pocantico thinned, but nobody inside the Rockefeller house relaxed. The guard captain kept men posted anyway, because once you've seen a gate rattle under hate, you stop believing it's over. Elias didn't stay to watch the driveway all day. That telegram line, "Noise in Manhattan, something being built," stuck in his head because it didn't sound like a protest warning. It sounded like someone had overheard a workshop. He rode back toward the city on the first train that didn't feel like a parade of reporters. In Manhattan, the mood was different from Pocantico. Less shouting, more whispers. Clerks in telegraph offices talking too quietly. Patrolmen standing in doorways like they were waiting for a call. One newspaper boy yelling, "Ludlow!" even when the headline was about banks, because the word sold. Elias tracked the simplest thing, where the warnings were coming from. A tip like that doesn't float in the air. It gets wired through a station, passed by a runner, repeated by someone who wants credit later. He found the station on Lexington Avenue, where a messenger had been seen coming and going at odd hours, and he paid for a straight answer, who had been sending late-night telegrams to Tarrytown and Pocantico. The clerk behind the counter wouldn't give him names, but he gave him a look that said, "Don't keep asking here." Elias stepped outside, and that's when the city answered the warning in the only language it couldn't take back. A blast. Not a distant thunder sound. A sharp, ugly crack that made people on the sidewalk flinch and look up like something had fallen from the sky. Windows down the block trembled. Then came the sound that always follows. Screams, running feet, and that weird moment of silence in between where your brain tries to decide if it's real. Elias ran toward it with everyone else. A townhouse on Lexington Avenue had been torn open from the inside. The front parlor was gone, just splintered wood and shattered brick. Smoke poured out in a thick, greasy column. Pieces of metal lay scattered in the street like teeth. 2 bodies were visible in the debris, and a third figure, an adult woman, stumbled out with her hair singed and her dress ripped, blood on her face, eyes wide like she'd been dragged out of a nightmare. Police came fast. Not detectives with notebooks first, uniforms with batons, because the city's instinct in 1914 was control. They pushed people back, cordoned off the sidewalk, and started shouting for doctors. Then the whispers started immediately. Dynamite. A bomb. A workshop. Somebody was building something, and it went off too soon. Elias didn't need to guess. He could see the pieces on the ground: pipe sections, torn cloth, packing material, fragments of timing parts. This wasn't a stove accident. This was assembly. An officer near the line said, loud enough for bystanders to hear, "They were making it." Another answered, "For who?" That's when Elias saw the detail that connected Manhattan to the mansion like a wire snapping tight. A plainclothes man, adult, brisk, used to scenes like this, lifted a scorched notebook from the rubble with a cloth and flipped it open without thinking. For a half second, Elias could see the page before the man snapped it shut. A word at the top, underlined. Rockefeller. Maybe it was a guess. Maybe it was rumor. Maybe it was exactly what the bomb makers wrote for themselves. Either way, it hit Elias like ice water, because he'd just left a mansion that spent all night preparing for a threat it couldn't fully name. He tried to get closer and got blocked. The plainclothes man glanced at him, saw the coroner credential Elias flashed, and told him, "Go home. This isn't your case." That's when Elias understood what the Rockefellers had that most people didn't: distance. In Pocantico, danger came to a gate you could see. In Manhattan, danger was built in a room you'd never know existed until it exploded. Within hours, reporters were already writing the version of the story that could travel fastest: radicals, dynamite, a plot, a target. Some papers pointed at the Rockefellers, some didn't. But the word was out, and once a name like Rockefeller gets attached to bomb, it spreads faster than any correction. Elias went back uptown that same afternoon. Not to the gate this time. To the house where decisions were being made. He wasn't allowed into the main rooms. He was met at the service side by an aide who looked like he hadn't slept and didn't intend to. Elias said one sentence, and the aide's face changed. "Lexington Avenue Blue," Elias said. "They were building something." The aide didn't ask how Elias knew. He asked, "Did they say our name?" That question told Elias everything. They were already tracking it, already anticipating the headline, already thinking in terms of control. Inside, the mansion didn't feel like a home at all now. It felt like an office that happened to have carpets. Ivy Lee was there, calm and focused, not panicking, not praying. He was drafting. He was shaping. Elias heard him say, in a voice that carried through the hall, "We do not look afraid. We look responsible. We condemn violence. We express concern for life. We return to the labor question with dignity." That was the moment the story became truly mind-bending to Elias, not because a bomb exploded, but because he realized what the mansion was really doing. It wasn't just defending itself. It was preparing to turn an attack into leverage. Not leverage to hurt people, leverage to change the narrative, fast. The guard captain wanted to tighten the gate again. Lee wanted Rockefeller Jr. photographed as calm, civic-minded, reasonable. The lawyers wanted every telegram burned. The staff wanted to survive the week. Elias stood in the corridor and watched it all click into a single machine. Security, publicity, law, and silence, all running under one roof. And then he heard the line that made him go still. A messenger handed Ivy Lee a telegram slip. Lee scanned it once and said, "Lo." It was meant to travel. Meant to travel. Not a random bomb in a random room. Something designed to be delivered. Elias looked at the mansion's heavy doors, the long drive, the iron gate, and the crowd that had shouted all night. And he understood what the last part of this story was going to be about. Because if the device was meant to travel, then the biggest question wasn't who hated the Rockefellers. It was this: how close did it actually get? And what did the Rockefellers do with that fact once they had it? By sunrise, Manhattan had already turned the Lexington Avenue blast into a headline, and the Pocantico Gate into a rumor. Some papers screamed anarchists, others screamed Rockefeller. Either way, the message was the same. This wasn't just anger anymore. This was hardware. Elias got back to the estate before lunch and found the mansion running like a courthouse. No crowds at the gate now. Too quiet. The guards were doubled anyway. Staff weren't chatting. They were moving in straight lines, eyes down, like everyone had been told the same thing. One mistake, and you don't just lose your job. You end up on the front page. In the study, Ivy Lee had taken over a table, the way generals take over maps. A stack of newspapers on one side, telegram slips on the other, and in the middle, a single sheet with short, clean sentences. What the family would say, and what the family would never say. Then the county man arrived with something that changed the entire story. Not a rumor. A police inventory note from the Lexington scene. Written fast, plain, practical. Pipe sections, cloth packing, timing material. And Elias saw Lee's eyes lock on one detail, the pipe size. Because it matched the crate, the Rockefeller guard stopped at the gate the night before. The medical supplies crate that held heavy metal wrapped in cloth. For a second, the room went silent. Not the dramatic kind, the administrative kind. The kind where everyone realizes they're staring at the same truth from two angles. The crate wasn't random. It was the second half. Elias watched the guard captain step forward and set his own note on the table. When the crate was opened at the gravel patch, one piece had been missing, like the shipment had already been split before it reached the gate. That was the blow-your-mind moment, because it flipped the timeline on its head. The Lexington bomb didn't mean the threat was over. It meant the threat had already been moving. The mansion hadn't been almost attacked, in some vague way. It had been placed on a delivery route. Someone had tried to push the parts through a normal channel, counting on routine to do what force couldn't. And now, Ivy Lee made the coldest decision in the whole case. He didn't say, "We hide." He said, "We control what this becomes." Here's what that looked like, mechanically, inside a Rockefeller mansion. Simple, not poetic, and terrifying if you think about it. Step 1. Separate the stories. The family would condemn violence loudly and immediately. That part would be public. It would be repeated. It would become the headline that stuck. Step 2. Avoid the question everyone actually cared about. Not, were you targeted? But what about Ludlow? The mansion's job was to keep every microphone pointed at the bomb, not at the burned tents in Colorado. Step 3. Turn the attack into a shield. Once the public sees you as a potential victim of extremist violence, it becomes harder for average people to keep chanting "murderer" at your gate without feeling like they're crossing a line. Elias expected panic. What he saw was strategy. And then Lee said the sentence that made Elias understand the mansion wasn't just defending the Rockefellers, it was inventing something bigger. "We're going to move him," Lee said, meaning Rockefeller Jr. "Not into hiding, into the light." The guards hated it. The lawyers argued. But the decision stood. Rockefeller Jr. would be photographed, interviewed, shown as calm, civic, reasonable. Meetings would be arranged. Statements would be drafted. The goal wasn't to win one news cycle. The goal was to rebuild the family's image in a way the country couldn't easily unsee. That's the real mansion built on blood twist in this story. Not a secret passage, not a buried room. A mansion used as a factory for reality, where tragedy, outrage, and even an attempted attack were processed into a public narrative that could outlive the facts. Elias thought he'd come to witness a rich family getting scared. Instead, he watched a rich family learn how to weaponize being scared. And the final turn, the one that still makes this whole episode feel unreal, was how fast it worked. Within days, the gate anger cooled. Not because people forgave Ludlow, but because the headlines shifted. Bomb plot, extremists, violence condemned. The conversation moved, and once a conversation moves, it's hard to drag it back to the place you want. Meanwhile, Inside the estate, the staff burned fewer telegrams and started filing them instead, because now those telegrams weren't just danger. They were leverage, proof of threat, proof of restraint, proof that the family had to take control of its story. Elias left Pocantico with one clear understanding. If you want to see power in America, don't look at the front gate. Look at what gets written at the table inside, because that's where the next decade gets decided. If you watch the video to the end, hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. And tell me this, do you think the Rockefellers were victims of a violent era, or masters at turning even a threat into protection for their name?